James had never imagined that the weight of betrayal could grow so heavy. The moment he discovered that Mr. Jones might be behind the family's pain, something inside him shattered. This wasn't just about lost shipments or business conspiracies anymore. This was personal, deeply personal. His hands trembled slightly as he listened to the quiet voice confirming the unthinkable. Drugs had been smuggled through the same routes once used for honest trade. James's heart sank when he learned that even his own father had unknowingly suffered because of Jones' manipulation. The idea that Jones used religious intentions and concern for the family as a mask to sell drugs left James feeling sick. He tried to gather his thoughts, but everything felt like a storm crashing into him from all sides. Jones had always acted like a mentor, a trusted figure in their lives. But it was now clear he had lied. Repeatedly, he had pretended to care, all the while using the business and people like chess pieces. The mask was off. He wasn't a misunderstood elder. He was cold and calculated. Even worse, Jones had targeted James's family and used their weakness for his gain. He sold illegal substances and covered it up with excuses and fake compassion. He manipulated emotions and played the victim, when in fact, he was the one destroying their peace. The pain of knowing Jones might be responsible for James's father's humiliation and family's fall was like a dagger turning inside his heart. And yet, what hurt the most was knowing how easily others were fooled, how they trusted Jones blindly without ever questioning. James began to understand that this wasn't just about money. It was about power, deception, and using human suffering to build a kingdom of lies. He learned that Jones might have pretended to want justice for the family, only to hide his actual goal, profit from destruction. The drugs, the betrayals, all of it connected back to him. The situation became even darker when James was told that Jones might not be acting alone. There could be someone else, someone dangerous, working with him. A shadow behind the scenes, pulling strings quietly. Some even said Jones might not be the real mastermind. That fear sank deeper in James's chest. If there was a darker force behind Jones, it meant the road ahead would be longer, more painful, and filled with more traps. Even Jones' claim about being from Thailand couldn't be trusted. Was he telling the truth, or just feeding them lies? Nobody knew for sure, and that uncertainty was tearing James apart inside. A friend approached James, mentioning that one of Jones' children may have been involved too. James could hardly believe it. The people he once thought were family had turned their backs on him. He remembered how much pain his family went through, especially his father, who had always been proud, honest, and loving. James felt overwhelmed with guilt. Guilt for not protecting his father, for not seeing through Jones' lies earlier. And now someone else, a woman close to Jones' children, was missing. She vanished without a trace. The local police had done nothing. They let her disappear like a forgotten name in the wind. James's heart broke as he imagined her alone, scared, possibly in danger. He realized that this wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about saving those still left in harm's way. He wanted to scream. He wanted to ask the world why evil had to hide in the faces of those closest to them. He promised himself silently that he wouldn't let this go, that he would find out the truth, even if it cost him everything. And somewhere deep inside, he held on to a single hope, that this pain would lead to justice, that this path, however dark, would end in light. He turned to those around him and asked for their help. He confessed that he couldn't do it alone. This battle, this storm of truth and lies, was too heavy to carry by himself. But they didn't turn away. They stood by him. They understood, because they too had been hurt. They too had lost. And now, they would stand together, not just to punish Jones, but to reclaim what was stolen from them: peace, truth, and the love of a family once torn apart. James felt like the world had suddenly become heavier on his shoulders. Every time he tried to rest, the faces of those he had lost and those who were still missing haunted him like whispers in the night. The discovery of Jones' lies, his connection to drug trafficking, and the mysterious disappearance of the girl connected to Jones' sons kept him awake, night after night. He knew he couldn't afford to let his emotions break him now. Too much was at stake. His family had already suffered enough. He had to remain strong, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been hurt. Each conversation revealed more darkness. It was no longer about business. It was about people, about lives being destroyed silently, one by one. James found out that Joan had used church-like gatherings and religious phrases not out of faith, but to cover up his dirty tracks. He used kindness as a tool to manipulate people's hearts. And now many innocent people had been left broken, confused, and scared. James could see how far this corruption had spread. Joan had connections in different countries. He was powerful, protected by people who turned a blind eye in exchange for money. As James began to gather more evidence, he found himself sinking into the memories of his childhood. He remembered his father's voice, calm, wise, and full of love. A man who had always believed in truth, no matter how hard it was. And now, knowing that this same man had been betrayed by someone he trusted was unbearable. James cried silently behind closed doors, not because he was weak, but because the weight of truth was just too much to carry sometimes. The pain felt like fire in his chest, but the tears reminded him that he still had a heart, and that heart still beat for justice. He reached out to the woman who had shared the warning about Joan's possible hidden partners. She was just as heartbroken. Her voice trembled when she spoke about the missing girl. It had been days, and there were no signs, no news, not even a single clue. The police had done little. Locals said she may have been kidnapped, or worse. James felt helpless, but he promised her he would not let this case go cold. He swore that he would do everything in his power to find out the truth. He couldn't let another innocent soul vanish because of Joan's greed. Meanwhile, a storm of rumors began to spread. Some said Joan had fled the country. Others claimed he was hiding in plain sight, using a fake name. And still, a few whispered that Joan was merely a puppet and someone else, far more dangerous, was behind everything. James didn't know what to believe anymore. The lines between truth and lies were blurry, but he knew one thing: his journey wasn't over yet. Not until the girl was found. Not until his family's name was cleared. Not until Joan and everyone protecting him faced justice. But the emotional toll was growing. James began to question himself. Was he doing the right thing? Could he actually protect everyone? Every phone call made his heart race. Every new piece of information opened another door to pain. But even in his weakest moments, he remembered Diep. He remembered her smile, her courage, and the way she had stood beside him when everything was falling apart. In her memory, and for the sake of those still suffering, he kept going. He pushed forward through the darkness, holding onto the hope that light still existed at the end of this nightmare. James wasn't alone. Friends began to step up. People who had once feared Joan now came forward, sharing what they knew. Slowly, piece by piece, the puzzle began to come together. He learned about secret meetings, coded messages, and foreign transactions that connected Joan to a bigger criminal network. It was terrifying, but also empowering. The truth was becoming clearer. Joan wasn't invincible. He could be brought down, but it would take everything James had, every ounce of strength, patience, and sacrifice. Late one night, James sat under the stars, staring at the sky and whispering a silent prayer. If there's still hope, if there's still time, help me bring her back. Help me fix what's broken. The wind didn't answer, but in his heart, he felt a small, quiet strength begin to grow. It wasn't loud. It wasn't fast, but it was real, and it would carry him through the storm to come. The days passed slowly, and every hour felt heavier than the last. James was exhausted, not just from lack of sleep, but from the emotional weight of it all. He kept reading and rereading the names, the places, the transactions, trying to find the one detail he might have missed. Somewhere in this massive web of secrets, there was a clue to Joan's whereabouts, and more importantly, to the missing girl. He couldn't afford another mistake. Too many people had already paid the price for silence and delay. But as much as he tried to stay focused, the pain in his chest grew worse. Memories of Diep began haunting him more intensely than ever. Not the pain of her loss, but the tenderness of their love. Her voice echoed in his mind, soft and full of hope. She had always believed that even the most broken hearts could still heal if they stayed true. That belief was the only thing keeping James standing. Sometimes he felt like she was still with him, guiding him. He didn't want to believe in ghosts, but sometimes the warmth in his chest didn't feel like grief. It felt like love refusing to die. In the middle of one rainy evening, a woman visited James quietly. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and her hands trembled as she handed over a small notebook. She said it had once belonged to her daughter, the same girl who had gone missing. James took it gently, as if the book might crumble from pain. Inside were notes, names, and symbols. Some were simple diary entries, written with fear. Others hinted at something darker. Hidden behind the last page was a note: "If anything happens to me, please tell James. Tell him the truth about Joan. He is not alone." The message hit him like a knife to the heart. It wasn't just a cry for help, it was trust. This girl, terrified and cornered, had believed in him. She had wanted him to know, to do something. James promised himself right then that he would not let her voice be buried in silence. He gathered his strength, took the notebook to his trusted contact, and began putting together a map of the lies. Places where Joan had been, places he had sent others to hide, warehouses, secret roads, shady border contacts. Everything was there. He just had to follow the trail. Meanwhile, inside his home, James felt his family watching him quietly. They never complained, but he could see the worry in their eyes. His brother tried to stay strong, but James could feel the cracks in him too. No one was untouched by this. Even the smallest child in the family had stopped laughing the way she used to. The house had become quiet, not in peace, but in fear. It wasn't just about Joan anymore. It was about the weight of darkness they all carried now. A silent storm that had settled over their lives. One night, James sat across from his brother, both of them sipping tea in silence. Then his brother broke down. "I used to believe that we could live a simple life," he whispered. "But now I feel like we've been living in someone else's nightmare." "James, when will it end?" James didn't answer. He couldn't, because he didn't know. He only reached out, placed his hand on his brother's, and said, "Not until the last person who's still missing is home. Not until Diep can rest in peace." More clues began surfacing. A contact in Thailand confirmed Joan had used fake names to pass through borders. He was hiding, but not far. There were whispers that Joan had fallen out with someone powerful, maybe even the person who had been protecting him all along. That meant Joan was scared. That meant he might make mistakes. James had to be quick. The notebook had coordinates, and hidden in those numbers was a location deep in the mountains, an abandoned villa that had been used for illegal trade. James knew it could be a trap, but it could also be the key. Before leaving, James wrote a letter. He left it in a drawer, sealed with Diep's name. Inside, he poured everything: his fears, his regrets, his love. He told her he didn't know if he would come back, but if he didn't, he hoped someone would find the letter and understand why he did what he did. It wasn't about revenge. It was about redemption. About bringing light to those who had been lost in the dark for far too long. James and a small team of trusted friends set out at dawn. The air was thick with tension. Every sound in the trees felt like danger. But as they neared the villa, the truth began to show itself. Signs of recent activity, footprints, scraps of food, a phone left behind. And then, in one of the back rooms, hidden beneath layers of blankets, they found her. Weak, pale, but alive. The missing girl. Tears ran down James's face as he wrapped his coat around her. She looked up, her lips barely able to form words. "You came," she whispered. James nodded, holding back the sob in his throat. "I promised." He carried her out, step by step, through the thick forest. And behind them, the storm of secrets began to collapse. Joan's network would not survive this. Not now. Not with the truth in their hands. James didn't know what would come next. But he knew one thing. This was no longer just a battle for justice. It was a fight for peace, for healing, for all the broken hearts, including his own. The rain hadn't stopped for days, but for once, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a cleansing. As James stood by the hospital window, watching the girl sleep peacefully under soft white blankets, he let out the breath he had been holding for weeks. The girl was safe now. She had been treated for exhaustion, malnutrition, and trauma, but she was alive. And that one truth was more powerful than all the pain that had led them here. She hadn't spoken much since they rescued her, only whispering a few words about Joan and the nightmares she'd endured. James didn't push her. He knew that healing didn't come from pressure. It came from presence, from knowing someone is standing by you when you feel you're drowning. And he stood by her day and night, just like Diep had once stood by him when his world had been falling apart. In those quiet hospital nights, James often spoke to Diep in his heart. He imagined her sitting beside him, holding his hand the way she used to when he was lost in thought. "We did it, Diep," he whispered one night, his voice barely audible. "She's safe. Maybe now you can rest. Maybe now we can all start to heal." But even as he said it, he knew the journey wasn't over. Not yet, because Joan was still out there. And while his power had been weakened, he wasn't gone. The girls' rescue had ignited something. Fear in the hearts of those who had been hiding behind him, and courage in those who had stayed silent for too long. Witnesses began to speak. Old files started to resurface. It was as if the truth had been buried for years, but now, slowly, it was clawing its way back into the light. One of Joan's closest former partners, an older man named Diep, came forward with information that shocked even James. He admitted that Joan had been laundering money through fake religious charities, using the funds to traffic more than just drugs and weapons. Children, women, voices that had gone missing in the dark, now crying out to be heard again. Diep wept as he confessed, saying he had once believed Joan was a savior. But power had turned him into something else, something cruel, something unforgivable. With Diep's confession, James and his legal team launched a full investigation. Police across borders were contacted. Government officials who had once looked the other way were forced to answer. And for the first time in years, people who had lived in fear felt a reason to hope again. But James didn't let himself celebrate. Not yet. Because every time he walked into that hospital room and saw the girl's haunted eyes, he remembered what was still at stake. One night, as he sat beside her bed, she finally reached out and grabbed his hand. Her fingers were trembling, but her voice was clear. "I heard about Diep," she said quietly. "She believed in people, even the broken ones. I think she would have been proud of you." James felt something break inside him. Not pain, not grief, but release. The tears came freely, and for the first time, they weren't just tears of loss. They were tears of love, of connection, of something too deep to name. Back at home, his family was slowly beginning to smile again. His brother, once worn thin by fear, now laughed with his daughter in the evenings. The walls of their home, which had echoed with silence, now rang softly with music and warmth. But even in this healing, James knew he had one final step left to take. He returned to the last known location of Joan. It was a secluded villa near the border, hidden behind heavy trees and watched by silence. The building was empty now, abandoned like a ghost. But James didn't come to fight. He came to say goodbye. To Joan, to the pain, to the version of himself that had lived in guilt for so long. He stood outside the gates, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Whatever you tried to destroy, Joan, we have rebuilt. You cannot erase us." And with that, he turned and walked away, not out of fear, but with strength. Because the truth was no longer something to be hidden or feared. It was alive. It was free. Later that evening, James stood by Diep's memorial. A gentle breeze brushed against his face, and for a moment he imagined her there, smiling, peaceful. He placed a white flower on the stone and whispered, "I miss you. I always will. But I think now, I can finally breathe." As he turned to leave, he saw the girl watching from a distance. She smiled faintly and walked beside him. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Because in that silence, a promise was born that they would keep going, not for revenge, not for power, but for every life still worth saving. And somewhere in the wind, carried by the fading scent of jasmine, Diep's spirit whispered back, "Thank you." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. More stories of strength, truth, and love are coming.